Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar for today, How to Make Your Nonprofit CRM Implementation a Success. This is the third in our Get CRM Ready workshop, the third webinar. We have the first one is on making the case for CRM at your organization, understanding what it is and what the benefits may be. And the second one was on planning for CRM and how to go about that. And the third one today, after you've done that planning, how do you implement it successfully? So I'm Keith Heller. I'm CEO of Heller Consulting. We've been doing work with nonprofits and their technology needs for the last 16 years. 900 clients, 1,800 projects. We're spread all over the country. And the most important statistic, we love what we do. We really, really enjoy working with the nonprofit organizations and supporting their missions and working with technology and kind of bridging the gap between people and processes and technology and making all that happen and really making you able to better extend and fund your mission. So it's a real pleasure to be presenting today to you. This workshop is hosted by theconnectedcause.com. This is our blog site where we're writing constantly about CRM and technology for nonprofits and how it relates to social and strategy and fundraising and mission management and all these great things. So we invite you to visit and subscribe. And my co-presenters today will be BJ Cordes, our VP of Client Services, and Smita Vadakekalam, our VP of Professional Services. So you're going to be hearing a lot from them quite shortly. The agenda today, we're going to talk about change management, the CRM implementation process itself. That's going to be the heart of the presentation. Project management, risk management, what are the roles on a project, and once you get live, some tips around ongoing support and optimization. And we're going to be drawing on the best practices that we've developed through our many years and many clients doing this. For those of you who have attended earlier webinars, you're going to see a couple slides that overlap because there's some continuity that we want to bring to the series. For those of you who might be just joining us here in this third webinar, we may make reference to some slides in some earlier parts, earlier topics in previous webinars, and we'll invite you to go online to theconnectedcause.com and view those at your leisure. So let's jump in. First piece is the implementation process, and to get us started is Smita, our VP of Services. Smita?
Great. Thank you, Keith. As Keith mentioned, we are going to talk about the various phases of a CRM implementation. And as you see on the slide, those phases are discovery, design, configuration, testing, and go live. We'll definitely get into some more detail in the following slides and talk about each of those phases. But one thing I do want to mention is that there are some overarching themes that you'll hear present in each of these phases, and they are planning and flexibility. You'll hear us refer to this a lot. It's absolutely important you plan, yet at the same time you want to be flexible and open to adjusting your approach. So you'll hear that theme repeated sort of throughout this webinar. Another concept that's important is the concept of dependencies. To note that each step depends on another. And so if one part or task of a project slips, the whole project will suffer. So it's really important that you communicate that to the people involved in the project so they understand how important it is to do their piece of the project well and on time, as it sort of impacts the entire project. And probably the most important theme listed here is change management. This, although it's mentioned last, it's probably the most important, and I'm going to dive in this a bit more in the following slides. So change management is a huge topic, and we could dedicate an entire webinar on this, but I'm going to summarize for you and share with you some of my favorite tips and tricks I learned through my experience and from my wonderful clients. So the first question is to ask yourself, why change management? A strong change management plan is critical to maximizing user adoption and user usage and maintaining momentum over long term in the project. So it's really important that you do consider this in your project, as it's key to the success of your project. A change management uses a structured approach, a proactive communication, and tasks to enable individual teams and stakeholders to adopt and participate in change. So you'll hear us talk about the ideas of change management throughout this webinar, but I want to share with you some of my favorite things I've learned. So in terms of planning, as this is really key, you want to make sure you proactively plan for people's time on the project. You are going to get your best resources on this project, your brightest and smartest individuals, and you want to make sure you don't burn them out. You want to make sure you allocate for the appropriate time. So if they're responsible for, 80% for a certain task currently, and they're going to be the key project manager on your project, you want to make sure you consider that and reallocate their daily job to somebody else. You don't want to lose your best and brightest. You want to make sure you keep that momentum up. Another thing that's key is setting expectations. You really want to make sure you're honest throughout the project. You're going to have to keep setting and resetting expectations throughout the project. So make sure you don't overpromise. That's going to get back to you if you start to make too many promises. Be honest and set expectation that there will be bumps, because just, be honest about the project is going to be hard. Change is hard, so it's important to plan for that. Another important concept is getting the right people involved. We'll talk more about this later when we talk about project management and having key stakeholders involved, having the people who support your project involved. But another concept I'd like to remind people about is also having sometimes your most difficult people involved. Don't forget about the skeptics. It's important to get buy-in and also important to involve them in the project. Sometimes there are things or things to learn from the people who can be most difficult. Another really important concept is to celebrate. So don't wait to celebrate at the end of the project. It's a really long journey. So make sure you're acknowledging milestones throughout and acknowledging people in different ways. Even something as small as a simple note of thanks, telling their managers, but constantly remember to acknowledge and celebrate. Another idea that I love is the idea of quick wins. So try to plan for what your quick wins may be in your CRM project. So that might be a simple report that's easy to sort of create, but it's going to get a lot of buy-in from people and get people excited about what's about to come. So try to identify what those quick wins are early in your project. And probably the most important thing here is communication. I like to think about running a CRM project like running a campaign. So like a campaign, you're very strategic about your communication. So think about your campaign slogan. Think about what that slogan is, and that slogan should message what that big picture is. Why are we doing the CRM project? And you want to make sure you tie it back to the mission of your nonprofit. So when you get deep into the details of the project, people need to be reminded what that bigger picture is, why they're doing this. So it's really important to have that repeated throughout.
I love what you said there. I love what you said there about involve the skeptic. It just points to how this is really a collaborative effort, and you want to involve everybody, and you get the most out of the project and out of the software in the end if you really go at it as a group. And that includes everybody, not just those who raise their hand. So the next slide, the communication plan, will look familiar to some of you. This is a variant of what you saw in the second webinar. We're going to go deeper here. For those of you who are being introduced to communication plans, I invite you to look at the webinar 2 where we start to introduce this. And Smita, you're going to go a little deeper here for us.
Yes, what you see here is, I would consider a sophisticated communication plan. It's pretty standard in project management. This just shows you sort of how you should think about your communication strategically. You're thinking about who you're communicating to, how often, and what exactly are you communicating. And it's good to have this very clearly articulated and communicated to everyone involved. Now, what I want to communicate here is, for change management, you need to go above and beyond what you see here on screen. You have to make sure that, this of course is the baseline, but throughout the project, there's going to be a lot of unplanned communication. So what that means is you need to have your ear to the ground, gauge your audience, try to get a sense of what's going on and how people are feeling, and you want to be able to react and communicate based on that. So sometimes that might be thinking of innovative and creative ways to communicate. It may involve face-to-face interaction. So, don't limit your communications by just your formal sort of written or email communication. Think strategically about the best way to communicate certain concepts. Another thing to think about is making sure you're incorporating feedback loops. So communication is not just one way. Think about the various ways you can collect feedback throughout the project.
Smita, this reminds me of one of the things that Lisa Fay from JDRF was saying in the last webinar is these sort of unplanned are things that the questions and communications that happen in the elevator, at the coffee,
right.
at the machine. People are saying, hey, what's going on in the project? And making sure, you have a response that makes sense and is useful to people, and also a way to collect information that people hear when they're out and about in the organization. Now, for those of you who look at this plan and go, oh my gosh, this communication plan is more complex than the CRM plan I was thinking of. There are simpler plans in Webinar 2, so I invite you to look at that. But you'll see when you compare this plan to the implementation plan we'll show you in a minute, they're both sophisticated because, and that's how important communication and change management can be. BJ, did you want to make a point here as well?
I did, and just to note the constituent boxes on the right-hand side, I think one of the pieces that is easy to forget, especially in project. In project, you have your project team communications, you're coordinating meetings, you've got your status updates, someone's tracking budget, someone's tracking tasks, there's schedules, there's dependencies. It's easy to get in project mode. Well, it's challenging to be in project mode, but that's typically the place where we start, or where our heads are at, is to say, okay, how do I structure this team? How do I move forward? And then you start to think about organization-wide communication, as in what do the people who are going to be using the system need to know, and when they need to know it. But it really is critical, and it really is a great opportunity to be thinking about the constituent communication as well. What a great message that should be to your board, to your donors, to your volunteers, your advocates, and whatnot, that we're in the middle of an effort, and we're in the middle of an effort for CRM, and that effort is based on being as effective as possible as an organization, communicating as effectively, providing customer service across possibly program areas, satisfying donor needs, and ultimately driving and growing the organization. To be able to be thinking on those terms as well, again, it can be especially challenging because on some level you're just trying to get the work done. You're trying to hit the next milestone. But again, I just want to underscore the point that it's especially critical, and it's a really fantastic opportunity to message broadly to your external stakeholders, and let them know what you're doing. Let them know why you're doing it, and let them know why it's important. And it really is a great stewardship piece, a great stewardship message that can and should be messaged, out to folks, so they know what you're hoping to accomplish, and why it's important and meaningful to your organization.
That's a great point, BJ, because the constituents, you might think, oh, this is a technology project. This is a strategic project to expand the impact and reach of your organization, and that's something constituents can get excited about. The other side of it is that every once in a while, if there's a hiccup in the project, constituent might get an email twice or something like that. Sure. Well, if they know that you're in the midst of one of these projects, they're going to go, oh, okay, that happens. Got it. And you never know when you're going to find in your constituent base someone who gets really excited about what you're doing and also has means and wants to help fund it. So that's, there could be that needle in the haystack too. So let's jump now or ease our way into how does a project itself unfold? Smita?
Sure. So what you see on screen is a sample project progression. This represents a phase of a project. As you might have learned in previous webinars, a typical full CRM project may last 1 to 3 years. So what you see here is represented as one phase. So that could range from 3 to 9 months. What I think is really important here is to make sure in your project you're articulating to your stakeholders how long each phase is going to take, so people get a sense of what to expect. So as you can see here in this example, we have configuration and testing being the longest phase. So this may represent, the conversion of maybe your legacy fundraising database to a new system. So it's important to for people to get a sense of when they may be involved and how long each phase of the project may take. And this will vary from project to project depending on the scope of what you're doing.
So, and now we're going to keep this slide in mind, take a good look at it, and in the next several slides we're going to break it down and talk about different chunks of this in more detail. So the first one we're going to talk about is on the top left there, discovery and planning, and then design. Those are the next two slides. And here, discovery and planning, we covered this in pretty good detail in the last webinar, but I'll say a little bit about it here. This is where you're going out and you're getting a lot of information about the organization and where you are today, what systems do you have, what reports and lists do you generate, what are your business processes, what are your documentation, what kind of data do you have, et cetera. And a bubble we didn't put on here, strategy moving forward. What are your hopes and dreams and intentions for the next 12 months, the next 18 months, 36 months? Where do you want to be in 5 years or even 7 or 10 years? Just so it's on the radar, right? And all of that information gets collected, and it helps, as you see on the right, frame the design of the system, which we'll look at on the next slide. What are your priorities? So Smita just said that any CRM rollout project as a whole is made up of multiple phases. Well, what's going to come first? Where's our greatest pain? Where's our greatest opportunity? Where does it make sense to start with our move towards CRM? That, those priorities will be identified. You'll define those phases. What are the gaps and risks? We're going to talk about risk management a little later. And what kind of resources and time is it going to take to get this project done? So that discovery phase is going to play into all of that. And Suta, I think you had a comment here as well.
Yeah, the one thing I want to mention is make sure you don't brush over this phase. Make sure you're including and have considered every stakeholder. So, for example, maybe there's a smaller department within your organization that's using paper or Excel to track whatever their needs are. Don't forget about them. It's really important that you include more people than necessary in discovery, because it's much harder to incorporate different departments and needs later on. So you really want to think about every possible stakeholder at this part of the phase.
Yeah, I do encounter folks once in a while who say, they'll call me up and say, Keith, we want to do a CRM project. I say, where do you want to go? They say, I don't know. Let's just get in the car and start driving. I say, well, shouldn't we maybe look at the map and, decide what our destination is? No, we just want to get going. We're biased. You can't spend too much time in planning.
It's it's an interesting something. We see this every so often, and I think even as we do CRM projects 24/7, 365 a year. But I find one of the problems you can bump into, one of the pitfalls if you're not careful, is you start to think about the technology, or you start to think about the solution too soon. And while discovery will ultimately inform what the CRM will look like, what processes it will enable, it will determine what systems are impacted. It'll do all those things. But this is really that moment in time where you don't have to think about that. You don't have to think about the machinery. You don't need to think about the technology. You can just say, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? And what we're certainly not trying to accomplish is we're not trying to replicate the legacy system in the new system, right? That defeats the purpose of all this effort. But there's an opportunity here, again, to say, hey, what's this all about? What we're working to do is we're working to be efficient or be effective. We would like to see our moves management process enable this, and this. It's really time for a whiteboard, and it's really not time necessarily to be in the system and saying, well, but how does the tool exactly execute that, or which checkbox do I need to check to make that happen? It really is an opportunity to think a little bit bigger, a little bit more freely about what you're trying to do. And really reimagine or reinvent the overall process for the organization. And by discovery, really discover the way you want things to be, not the way that the technology may ultimately frame things or define things. So
I think
again,
but this is where you do the big picture. Where are we trying to go as an organization? What do we need our technology to do? What's the end point? And then you have, as you see on the left, a lot of, okay, where are we today? And the discovery results are how do we get from today to where we want to get to in the future? And the first piece of that is design. So once you have a sense of where you want to, what you need your systems to do for you, you can start to design what they look like. Now this slide, I think this is the second or third time we've shown this slide in the workshop series, and there's a lot on this. So I'm going to refer you back to the past couple webinars where we really unpack it. But the short and sweet of it is you're going to end up most likely with a CRM environment that includes, bottom circle on the left, something to manage your donors, functionality to manage your mission, functionality for online engagement. Now those don't have to be separate systems. They could be potentially a single CRM platform. But those are the key business areas that people need to be looking at. You're going to have business intelligence, possibly data integrations, workflow business practice. All this comes together, but how it comes together for your organization ultimately will depend on what comes out of discovery, and where you start will be based on those priorities and opportunities that come out of discovery. So, having gone through the design and nailed that down a little bit, the next part of the project is core business processes. So, Smita, if you could tell us a bit more about that.
Sure. So over here, you really want to think about, and this was mentioned earlier, about your workflow and processes, and note that they will change. You want to start with industry best practices. Try to think outside of, wait, this is how we've always done it. This is an opportunity, as we mentioned earlier, to change things, to align with best practices, to align with that CRM strategy that you're moving towards. Another big component or conversation here is defining constituents. So if your organization previous to this project had silos or departments maintaining their own databases, they have maybe this idea of owning their own constituents. So for example, fundraising may think of their constituents as donors and they have them separate, while maybe your volunteer department has their constituents as volunteers. Now, when you're moving to a CRM system, this is when everyone owns the same constituent, and you have to really make sure you have this conversation about this and what it means to your organization. So this involves conversations around the rules of engagement. So if that same person is a donor and also maybe a client who receives services at your organization and a volunteer, you have to figure out who communicates with that constituent and how. So these are important conversations to have, and it's important to clarify those processes. What's related to that is security. So at times, this may involve maybe a more sophisticated security structure. So for example, there might be, if we're all sharing the same record, there might be components of that record that should be hidden from certain departments. And it really depends on your organization, but it's important to have a very detailed conversation around security. Another thing related to this is the idea of online and offline constituent information. So if you are moving from maybe your online content management system was separate from your offline, they weren't integrated, and maybe you're moving to a integrated platform, one system, you want to make sure you have the conversations around that one constituent, which information is public-facing, external, available to the constituent versus what information is only available internally, offline. So it's important to distinguish that. Another important conversation is revenue management. So make sure you involve your accounting team, thinking about auditing best practices. How are you going to take this information, reconcile it with your general ledger, And make sure you have buy-in from accounting. This is a really critical part. You have to figure out the details around this. And another thing not to forget is if you use other vendors, for example, for Lockbox or for maybe your direct mail strategy, don't forget to include them in these conversations if they are going to be included in the larger CRM project, because the changes you make to processes are going to impact them. So make sure you include them in your early conversations. So one of the biggest, go ahead, yep.
Okay. If I could speak, and I hope I'm not throwing off your flow here, we did see a question come in about discovery. Do you mind if we field that for just a second?
Sure.
The question that came up was about the discovery duration, and it's probably a question that applies to every phase. So it's probably something you and I can maybe incorporate in as much as it's ever possible into the slides moving forward. Specifically to discovery, and Smita, Keith, I'd be interested to hear your perspective on this as well. I would generally rule of thumb say it's about 20%, maybe 25%. And my thinking behind that, and let's say it's a 9-month project, that it might be a month, maybe 6 weeks or whatnot, is that you want to have a chance, to Smita's point earlier, to meet with every key business unit and make sure they have sufficient time to have their say and to circle back for a second round for clarification as well. And just inherently, that's typically going to take, regardless of the organization size, it might take a month, or it might take a month and a half to really make sure you have a chance to ask the first time and then develop it with a round of follow-up as well.
I think that's spot on, BJ, and part of what I would add to that is that time spent in that is not just the practical time to gather the information and make some conclusions. It also, spending the appropriate amount of time to plan is part of the change management process. It takes time for people to digest. What are we doing here? What does it mean for me, for my department, for the organization as a whole? You have to let those conversations happen. They're important conversations, and if you don't give them time early on, those conversations will creep up as doubts throughout the project. So the time you spend planning has both a practical and I guess sort of a political importance that you want to give it its due. Now that actually ties to the next phase here, testing, where this is also really key, and it has elements that are both practical. We need to understand what the system is doing, but also are part of change management. So, Smita, you want to tell us a little bit about this?
Sure. And just to your point, I can safely say change management occurs in every phase. So you should constantly be thinking about it, and what are the things you can do proactively to get people to feel more comfortable with that change. So you're thinking strategically and creatively throughout. With testing here, it's definitely, I would say, the largest time commitment for your users. So this is where, in the project, you want to try to plan ahead and get people to mark this time on their calendars, because this is where you're going to need a lot of feedback, and it's critical. We usually say this at the start of the project. Testing is during this date range. Make sure you block your calendars out. The other point I'd like to make about this is keep your testing period discrete. What I mean by that is, if your testing period is 1 week, or if it's 3 months, make sure it's not open-ended, so that, as we all know, everyone, regardless of how much time they have, will tend to leave testing to the last minute. So the way to sort of manage that is to make sure you have a really tightly planned testing period. So if it is 3 months, make sure you're very clear on what happens each week of that month. Maybe you do need 3 months, but have a testing strategy around it. Make sure, you think about, are you going to be deploying an iterative testing strategy? That means, are you going to be testing pieces of data as it's converted, or will you test the data when it's all in the new system. Make sure you think carefully about what people are testing and give people clear processes to test. You also want to be very strategic about who's involved in testing. Involve, the people, make sure you have good representation from your organization and you have the right people who are demonstrate, an interest in this and can be very thorough and have the time to do that. One other thing is beware of grand ideas. Once people start getting into the system, this is a good and bad thing in that you'll have wonderful ideas come up, but you have to make sure you're thinking about, is this idea something that's within scope and realistic in this project, or is this an idea that's something that we'll do later? An idea for post-project. Make sure you consider everything, but make sure you're clear on what's in scope versus something for later. And testing, another thing to think about, testing can be also a form of training. So people get familiar with the new system and you get some tips on, what are people struggling with? That might be some tips on developing your training agenda for later.
Yeah, and this is one of the things I love about the testing process is that from a change management perspective, it allows people to get comfortable with the system. And comfort with the system is different than knowledge of the system. You can train somebody on how to do something new in a few hours, in a few days, but that doesn't mean they're comfortable. And comfort is something that happens with time, sort of like osmosis. And so in the testing process, you're giving people a chance to make the mistakes they're afraid to make when they go. If you throw them into the deep end and just say, hey, here's some training, go live, you're really giving people a chance to ease into all of it. And again, user acceptance and user adoption of the system is the long-term goal. You can deliver the most technically beautiful system, but if people don't use it, the project's a failure. So testing is really a great part of the project. So now we're going to dive into some really fun nuts and bolts pieces with data conversion and then online and social. And BJ, why don't you take us there?
It doesn't get more granular than data conversion. We're talking about the field-by-field mapping of your legacy system to your new system, right? So you're literally going through and saying, hey, this field, first name, is going to this other field, F name, or last name is going to L name. And then obviously where it gets really sporty is when you get into the historical information. You get into your attributes, you get into your specific actions or activities, and then kind of throwing some razor's edge language out there. But the idea is to move from one system to the other. Now, of course, you don't want to do this in the 11th hour. You want to start this process early, and you want to have it going continuously in parallel to the rest of the project. This is not a 2-week effort. No matter the size of your system, your system's change. This is something that you want to be able to, up front on the first day, start to think about, well, this data set doesn't quite look like the data set it's going to. What are the problems? What are the issues? What might be the schedule gaps during the cutover? And begin building those items into your plan and making the shift over in a very comprehensive way. Worth noting as well, everything doesn't have to go. I actually just saw the Will Ferrell movie. I don't know if you guys have seen this, where he's been cast out onto his lawn with all his possessions. I won't get into the details of the plot, but it's essentially his parting with a lot of stuff that he didn't necessarily need. Now, he kept the stuff that was most critical and most important he's going to use again. He did lose his golf clubs. But it was an opportunity for some house cleaning. It was an opportunity to say that not all of this stuff needs to go over. Let's just bring over the data that matters. Now, as a former development officer, I'm inclined to say someday I'm going to send out messages that are so granular, so segmented, that I'm going to need that historical information. I'm going to need to know that somebody volunteered at a booth 10 years ago in some state outside of their primary residence, and that's absolutely critical. Again, you're probably not going to do that, and this is a really good opportunity as you're going through a systems change to start to think about what matters. and to start thinking about, well, really, what's the ROI, or what's the work effort required to bring over that really specific historical information that, again, may not ever impact your strategic decisions or your appeals or approaches.
BJ, I really appreciate the perspective you bring to this is both big picture strategic mixed with tough love. So it's spot on.
Yeah.
So let's talk about online. Tell us a bit about that.
Great. One of the things, and I hope this is a theme that everyone is picking up out of our CRM conversations, is when we talk about CRM, we're not just talking about database. We're not just talking about where data is stored, maybe where gifts are processed, where the very kind of granular day-to-day the organization is run. We're also talking about the storefront and how do you engage your constituents. For many of us, on a day-to-day basis, that's our website. That might be our social presence. Those might be places where we're out there and we're interacting with the community. What we want to make sure we do when we're doing CRM planning is we want to run this in parallel. Right? If you're planning, make sure your plan is comprehensive. It's not just your database; it's your online presence, it's your social presence. Make sure that you're engaging marketing in communications. Always a red flag for us if we haven't had a chance to talk to marketing or communications in the context. We just have operations and development in the room. It means that we're not looking at the whole opportunity to leverage CRM. Of course, there's probably a chill goes up many a spine when we use the word integration. In certain instances, integrations can be awfully tricky. So making sure that you're starting the integration process, thinking about integrations, testing integrations, do that early. And make sure you do it carefully, comprehensively, and make sure you test it thoroughly throughout. Of course, there's a convergence of activities here. There's the back office systems and the renovation that happens there. There's the go live of potentially a public-facing portal or site. Ideally, those pieces work together, and the timing, they arrive at the same spot at the same time. So that cross-communication, if there are separate teams or separate business units responsible for it, making sure that they're hitting the same mark, or at least they have the same milestones in mind. A little bonus note here at the end. Social media and certainly some of the new tools that are available out there to capture social data, social information, social metrics or whatnot, they present a massive opportunity to learn about your constituents, what they're doing, where they're engaging, what they're saying about the organization. That entire conversation is available in a way that never has been before. But we need to be conscious and we need to be very aware that if that data isn't captured and planned for in a very specific way, it can be just noise. And what's more, that social data influx can really potentially overwhelm your systems. So almost an entire webinar there talking about social and social integration. But again, the key point is that this should absolutely run in parallel, and the communication across milestones for the two should be fully in sync.
BJ, I remember when we were putting the slides together, we were bemoaning the fact that we even had a separate line called online and social, and that we couldn't, that we're limited to 2 dimensions here. We can't have 3 or 4 or 5 dimensions. But we do this in part because we want to call it out and highlight it, because it is currently, thought of or organized separately for many nonprofits. So this is where people are, is that it's separate, but where everybody's going is that CRM integrates online and what we used to call offline and social. And of course, we're doing that with the technology, but remember again, if we go back to some of the earlier webinars, CRM, although we're talking today about the CRM systems and environment, CRM overall is a strategy of engaging your constituents, which is not first and foremost concerned with whether that's online, offline, et cetera. So BJ, your point, this brings it all together. So we've covered a lot of pieces in the implementation plan. Now is the super exciting part. We're at go live.
Mm-hmm. The key thing for go live is it's a busy time, right? It's an exciting time. The ribbon cutting, the balloons, the hurrah of your labor. In order for that to be a happy time and a well-organized time, we would always recommend that your go-live plan is nailed down long before your go-live. Might be 6 months before, might be 9 months before. It should be planned for long in advance because you don't want to go into that window any more than you would want to go into your annual campaign without a plan in place, without knowing, hey, how am I going to handle the moment we cut over? What's that first week going to look like? What are those first couple of weeks going to look like? What's the first 3 to 6 months going to look like? And being able to moderate and staff and resource for those periods, that influx, it's absolutely critical to change manage. It's absolutely critical to user adoption. It should be a happy time. It should be a time where folks who are going to have a lot more questions during this period than they certainly will 6, 9, 12 months out. You're going to want to make sure you can satisfy those questions and satisfy them quickly. One bullet I bumped over that I want to return to was just the minimizing the gap between training and use. It is a busy time. One of the places where you should be busy, we would highly recommend you be busy, is training. And it's challenging. So you've got your checklist, you've got all your work to do, but what you really want to make sure you have is your users being trained and completing their training within a very close window of when they start using the system, just to retain those skills, retain that information. It's a busy time. It's easy to kind of start this early, right? And you want to be careful about starting it too early, otherwise you start to lose some of that adoption, some of that awareness, or some of those skills that they built in training.
Yeah, BJ, that again, the training this close to go live, again, it's part of the change management. It's instilling skills and knowledge, but they've picked up some of those along the way through participating in the project, through the user testing, and this is a combination of providing skills and providing confidence, so that when they jump in and are into go live, they realize, hey, well, wait a minute, this system's familiar. I've done this before in this system. I can do this. And then when there are the inevitable bumps in the first weeks or months following the go live, there's the momentum for people to say, oh yeah, of course there's a bump. Let's get over that and keep going, rather than, oh my gosh, there's a bump. What do we do now? So let's tie this. I'm going to quickly just tie this all back together and say, here we are at the start line again. We're at the first slide, and we've just gone through all of these pieces in some detail, and here you see it put all back together. So now we've only been talking for 25 minutes or so about this, so I wouldn't expect it would all cohere instantly, but I invite you to take a look at this plan again, and when you have access to the slides and the webinar, go through it again if it's useful to you, and you'll see this in a new way, this plan, how it all fits together. Now this plan is simply one part potentially of a multi-phase CRM effort, and BJ, I invite you to say a few words about this in the context of multi-phase.
Sure. One of the challenges is that folks will often say, how long is this going to take? And it's easy to start to say, well, it's going to take a year, 2 years, 3 years. There's a lot here. We're strong components of the idea of that you should think in terms of 9 months. And the rationale for that, even if you're not going to do the entire piece, you might only do the first phase, the foundation, if you will, is that after 9 months, or if you extend much beyond 9 months, the technology, the environment, if you will, can literally shift on you. Right? A 5-year project is very, very likely to be obsolete by the time you make the finish line. So we would put forward the idea that think in terms of what can you accomplish in 9 months, and give an opportunity at the end of those 9 months for that foundation you've built to dry, if you will, and then build that next phase on. Maybe you're adding a program component or a volunteer component or an event component as the immediate next phase, and maybe that third phase is something else. But again, we are strong components of the idea of see what's realistic and feasible in those first 9 months, and start from there, or phase from there.
Thanks, BJ. Of course, I was going to say great approach, but that's our approach. I'm sort of biased, huh? So So now we're going to turn to the next few slides. We're going to be talking about project management and then project roles. So BJ, I know you're a huge proponent of project management. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Project management, in my mind, is a discipline. It's there's a set of skills. There's a framework. Effective project management is it's very much a comprehensive skill set. A few specific pieces within that, or things that we would encourage a project manager, and some folks on the phone might be soon to be project managers to their CRM project, is first and foremost, think of yourself as the primary point person for project planning and for change management. Right. The idea is that one person should really be the central hub of this, the spoke that, or the wheel, if you will, with many spokes on it, that a project can be, and that person or people who manage the project are essentially responsible for keeping track of or creating the plan up front, but also keeping track of the plan throughout. Within the context of executing the project, certainly thinking about how technology will align, but also thinking about risk mitigation, anticipating problems before they occur while there's still risks. Once a risk happens, it's now an issue, and it's much harder to recover from. So continuously thinking about, hey, what's on the horizon, or what might flare up? Is there something I can do to steer clear of that, or is there some way I can be absolutely certain I will avoid it? Again, having that sense of not just the plan as a set of tasks running end to end, but also recognizing the obstacles or the things that might veer just off the side of the path that could potentially impact your effort. And then clearly, keeping track of your vendors. Many CRM projects are going to engage multiple vendors, and making sure that that group is focused on the solution, is focused on the plan, and is also proactively thinking about risk management as well. So good.
TJ, one of the things I just have to relate real quick is in the early years of the firm, we did what we consider project management, and then someone asked me about our practices, someone much smarter than me, and I said, oh yeah, we do project management. They said, well, what do you base your project management on? I said, well, a healthy dose of paranoia. And they said, well, there's a better way. There's actually PMI, the Project Management Institute. And I said, really, there's a whole group of people constantly studying this and figuring out what's the best way to go about doing large, complex projects. And now, from there, we're over a half a dozen people in the firm who are PMP certified. Like there's a literal, kind of degree you can go get and do this, and it's fascinating, and it's crucial. So tell us a little bit more about the getting involved with the people from a project management perspective.
Yeah, the key here is that you're likely to have a project manager. You're likely to have a single person, the hub, if you will, the keeper of the schedule, the plan, the effort. But the act of managing the project should be broader. It should involve a broader stakeholder group. We've seen to great effect on projects a peer review committee form. And this may be a cross-section of folks from across the organization. It may be just one person from each business unit, but it also ought to be multiple tiers. It might be someone who's processing gifts every day. It might be the CTO or the executive director. It might be many different people from across the firm. The more representative this body is, the better that body is going to be able to help you identify project risks. To say, hey, the downstream impact of this decision could be this. Let's not do that. They also become the ambassadors to communicate the change. You've essentially deputized this peer review committee, whether it's the point earlier. Actually, Lisa Fay made it in the last webinar. Was you've got a group of people who are in the elevator, and who someone says, hey, what's going on with CRM? You have someone there who can respond and say, hey, this is what's happening. It's very cool. This is what it's going to mean to us. So they're able to communicate and broadly in a way that's more compelling to a broader cross-section of folks. And then what's more, who better to adjust the plan than the people who are recognizing the risks, recognizing the impacts, recognizing the opportunities. And this last point is critical. It's not just symbolic. This is not a rubber stamp committee in our minds. This is a group that while many people will be involved, this can be your central committee that can help ensure that the solution that's delivered in the context of CRM, the end result, actually will effectively meet your organization's needs. And again, this concept of a peer review committee as a way to distribute the load, if you will, is what we've seen used to great effect in a number of projects, and we'd encourage folks to consider it.
Yeah, it's beyond two heads are better than one. It's that taken to another degree. Now, I have to, before I advance, I have to give a shout out to Brian, who helped us put the slides together. I think you went to Berkeley, where I live, and took a picture of the people there, because I see these people every day on my way to the coffee shop. All right, so we're going to revisit a slide we've seen here, and it's just previewing it. I'm not going to flip the slide yet before I tell you, boy, the words on this slide, we should just only have those words in bold. This is spot on.
And we've already touched on this, Smita has, and I think we've talked about it at some length, but worth restating. The way you communicate the project, really the way you carry out the project, can have an even greater impact than, say, the technology involved. Maybe I'll crib some Jack Kerouac here. It ain't what you write, it's how you write it. It's and that's the truth. It's the idea that the way you conduct the project is what will ultimately could be the critical success factor to user adoption.
I love that, BJ. You are on the CRM road.
There's a place for me there's a place for me in Berkeley, perhaps, with my Kerouac quote.
Okay, so now let's dig deeper into who's involved in the project and how they participate and contribute. And Smita, why don't you kick us off there?
Great. So we're going to start with, the executive team, and I think that's a great place to start. It's really important that you have an executive team that's providing strategic vision for this project. And it's really important that that executive team is constantly articulating that and demonstrating and showing visible support for this project. You want to make sure that they are doing their job in messaging that. They're determining the broader objectives of the project. And, some of the most successful projects we've experienced are those leaders who are constantly messaging this in every conversation they have. They're constantly communicating the bigger picture, the importance of doing this project. It really makes a difference in terms of change management. It relays that idea that this is important. It's not just, like we were saying earlier, a technology project. It's beyond that. This is how we're going to get to that next level. This is how we're going to further the mission of our organization. So it's critical that this happens on the executive level. Now, sometimes you may need to provide some coaching to your executive team. And depending on what your role is, if you're a project manager, maybe you're on that project team. But if you see something happening on the ground, or maybe people are having a hard time sort of grasping a concept or losing momentum around something, that's when you may need to coach your executive team. Give them some tips, tell them what's happening. That's when, it might be time for the executive team to sort of show some visible support. So it's two ways. Another role of the executive team is to approve budget requests. So there will be times in the project where there may be controversial decisions or things in the project that it might impact the overall timeline, the budget, or the scope. And when there's really large, important decisions like that, that usually goes to the executive team. So it's important that they're aware of their role on the project and show that support.
Smita, I have to chuckle. This coaching you do of executives, it sounds vaguely familiar in my own life.
Yes, from experience.
I think you coached me before. I do want to point out, though, sometimes when an executive hears that they have to provide strategic vision, they can go, I don't know, people told me this is important. That's enough. That's enough. You can work as an executive, you can work with those people to understand, why is this going to be important to the organization? Okay, I get it. Give me my 3 talking points. And you just use those talking points every time you're talking to constituents, to board members, to the staff person in the elevator. That's fine. The executive doesn't have to sit down and cook up why should we do CRM and how will it happen. But they are the face of the big strategic vision. So, all right, let's talk about project manager.
So BJ did talk a lot about the ideas behind project management. This slide really shows you specifically what are those tasks that a project manager on a project needs to fulfill. So we get into some detail here. A project manager is the one with their eye on the budget, scope, and schedule. They're always looking to see, is there anything that's impacting any of those three things? That's a key role of the project manager. As BJ mentioned earlier, they are the single point of contact for all your staff and all your various vendors you may be working with. They're the facilitators. They facilitate that project team, which I'll be talking about next. Identifying requests and manage all staff resources. They'll be attending all your planning meetings. Monitoring any projects peripheral to the CRM project. Again, their eye is always on schedule, budget, or scope, and confirming each milestone or deliverable on the project. The one additional thing I want to say about this role is that it's really important, if you're about to engage in a CRM project, that you have someone who has A, the time, and B, the experience. So when we talk about time, make sure you're not just throwing this role onto someone who already has a full-time job and expecting that this is something they'll just add in during their, extracurricular and their after-work hours. This is a key role in the project, so make sure you dedicate the right time and the right person. Someone in this role should have experience in doing these type of projects and also really be well-versed in project management methodology. This is, when you're dealing with the CRM project, this is not when you want to test your newbies. You really want to make sure, as we said earlier, make sure they have the credentials, make sure they have the experience.
And we're down to just the last couple of slides, and the project manager, of course, is a key component of the project team. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. BJ mentioned earlier about your peer review team. Your project team are those key stakeholders. They're the key representatives of your various departments. The things that they'll be doing throughout the project are attending status meetings. They're going to be, again, those representatives. So they are responsible for presenting those relevant project updates about the project back to the staff. So that's an important role. Also, they're representing their area of responsibility. So if you have maybe your fundraising department represented, maybe it's your DBA there. It's key that they're representing their needs and everyone on that team's needs. Another key thing is make sure they have the time to do this. It's a role. Sometimes it could be a few hours a week, but it's really important that you clarify that up front about the time commitment. And really key on this is that your project team members are going to be the ones giving you insight on what's happening on the ground, what's happening in the organization. This comes back to that idea of change management and that feedback loop. You constantly want to have that. So it's critical you pick the right people on the project team and make sure they have the time to do this very important job.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Smita. So the last slide here, ongoing support and optimization. So we spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, we're going to go live with CRM. We're going to go live with the first phase. And then what do you do next? All of a sudden you have this, it's like kind of like having a baby. It's like all of a sudden you got one. It's like, oh, wait a minute, I didn't plan for all the rest of that. So what are you going to do? You want to think up front, how are we going to support the CRM once it's up and running? How are we going to continue to grow it? Even if we're not moving directly into the next phase, how are we going to ensure the long-term integrity of the data? You really want to start to plan this stuff at the very beginning of the project, so you're not caught unawares. And one of the exciting things that happens when people adopt the product and get into it, they really get into it. Their enthusiasm and use of it and desire to use it might go beyond what you were expecting. And so you want to have your resources in place and people assigned to the feeding and care of the CRM on an ongoing way, so you can continue to take advantage of the investment that you've made.